Welcome to On the Bench. I am your host for this episode, Brendan Sonnone, joined by Chris Nee. Chris, I'm sounding much better. I feel rejuvenated, and after hanging out with you in Jacksonville for the last few days, it's football season. Like, I'm ready for it. I'm here to go. Does that excite you? Does it make you feel anything at all?
I'm glad you're feeling good. I'm happy for you.
Thank you. So we are through 8 practices of FSU football. The genesis of this podcast basically is just going to be an old school style of Chris and I just kind of riffing about the roster, going position by position, applying things we've learned, projections. But I thought this would be a really appropriate time to do it, largely because I was going through our inventory of our OTB feed on the back end and trying to get some data together for some unrelated things. And it was showing when you do that, it shows the top 10 episodes that we've had from downloads in the last year. And one of the ones that popped up was a podcast titled, "So This FSU Football Team Might Be ... good?" And that was done after 6 practices last preseason camp. And it was a tepid approach of Chris and myself to start expressing, hey, we have optimism about this team. I was thinking that a 7-8 win season was realistic. Ends up being 9 regular season wins. They exceeded our expectations, but we were into padded practices at that point. We had 6 practices of data points to kind of start feeling things about the team. And so that was a fun podcast for me to go back, listen to, and said, let's juxtapose it with this episode today that we're doing. 8 practices in, but more or less kind of a similar timeline, right? And Chris, I'm going to start off with saying I know this football team is good. There's no question about it. It's a matter of how good at this point. I think you probably feel similarly.
Yeah, there were some folks asking in the practice report yesterday about like just where we kind of feel they are versus where we thought they were entering the preseason. And I feel very good about them. I'm on record multiple times saying I think the offense is capable of being ultra explosive and very, very balanced and very, very good. The main concern I had entering the preseason was probably twofold. One, safety, depth, young guys, who's going to step up among that group. Some positive developments in that regard, and we'll get to that. And then punt return special teams as a whole. I won't say I'm feeling great about punt return special teams, but I think I feel slightly better than I did entering the preseason, and we'll get to that too.
I think the general overview, and we are going to get in the weeds here, folks. This will probably be an hour-long podcast of us going in depth on the roster and answering some buyer Sonnone, sponsored by
the Turner Group
questions. So we were going to get into it, but like the general thought, I'm just going to reiterate what Chris said. I think I went into camp and I kind of try to set like an expectation of like, okay, how many wins do I think this program's going to have? How's the roster look? And I went into camp thinking that we should be viewing this team in the prism of being able to win 10 regular season games as long as you're relatively healthy. And then you go from there, right? If you end up winning 1 or 2 more, then that changes things when you're talking about that high of a win total. And I feel only reinforced by thinking this is a 10-win team. And maybe more, who knows? But like, I don't see a ton of weaknesses to Chris's point. I think what we've seen through 8 practices, I think myself 5 or 6 after missing a few earlier on. Like just you can listen to a bunch of different podcasts or read a bunch of different insider reports from websites. I think we're all kind of seeing the same thing, and even just general fans who showed up to Jacksonville practice, the team just looks different as a simplistic way of phrasing it. But you look at the depth along the trenches, you look at the body types along the trenches, you look at what they have at their skill positions out wide, and the way just guys move. Like, how many guys do you think belong at the Power 5 or Power 4 now level, Chris, on this roster? Like 95% of them?
Yeah, a vast majority of it. There's a handful of guys that probably won't be able to crack through here in any form or fashion. But we're having conversations, for example, like defensive end about a Jaden Jones and Dante Anderson, and those, not to go depth chart on us, but those are guys that are depth pieces. They are well below the guys that we expect to play a majority of the snaps or even a majority of the release snaps. We're more talking about how are these guys going to develop and be the next guys up, potentially further down the road. And having conversations about developing depth pieces for not 2023, but 2024 and 2025 is a weird place to be, where a few years ago you had concerns after you got beyond the starting 22 of how are guys going to respond and handle stuff, how are guys going to be from a depth perspective. They're just in a lot better place.
Well, before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to our primary sponsor of the podcast, Chattanooga Whiskey. I'm showing a beautiful bottle here that we picked up. I picked up for our travels to Jacksonville to share with Chris and Dane. This was from Market Square Liquors, a shop in Tallahassee, former podcast sponsor of ours. But I'll show them some love since they're doing a great job hosting a bunch of different Chattanooga whiskeys in the store. And the bottle I just showed was a single barrel selection that is a wheat based whiskey. So instead of rye being the secondary part of the mash bill, it's wheat, which makes it usually a little bit sweeter, a little softer. Except for this is 119 proof, and so it had a little bit of a kick to it. Chris, what flavor did you get out of it almost instantly?
It was actually very smooth to initially drink. It was more the afterburn, the aftertaste, where there was a little bit of a cinnamon type of burn, a brown sugar type of burn. That's what I noticed. But I liked it. I just had one sip. It's too damn hot out right now to drink liquor and then go out and do practices. So I behaved myself, but I did enjoy the sample I had.
It will be a beautiful bottle to have in the fall when it gets a little cooler, and some of those spicy notes that Chris mentioned will probably go a little bit better with it not being 100 degrees out. But I think this is one that hold up to a big chunk of ice. And that's for me to say. Chattanooga Whiskey is even before we started before they started sponsoring us, was one of my favorite whiskey brands. Definitely my favorite craft whiskey brand out there. I'm so pleased that they've been our sponsor and been able to try all these different cool things beyond their really exquisite baseline of their 111 proof, their standard bourbon, and their rye. They do a bunch of great experimental stuff like this barrel strength wheat. So shout out Chattanooga Whiskey. Let's get into it, Chris. This offense is where we're going to start. The potential for it to be elite certainly exists. You bring back Jordan Travis, and that's where it all starts. That's where this conversation will start as we start going across the position groups. J-Trav, Tamini, he just looks so in control mastering this offense. And not to say he's always perfect, right? But like, you don't see a lot of yelling at him from coaches or a lot of them wondering what his decision-making process is. Even if he misses the throw or he doesn't make the right read, the process seems to be very, very clean for him. And I think that gives a lot of people around the program a ton of confidence about what they have in their quarterback.
Yeah, complete control, great patience. Improvisation is something that he's strong at. I mean, the first team defense that FSU's been rolling out there at times to compete with him when they're going good versus good. Really, really talented bunch. And I think yesterday may have been the first time all preseason I've seen him truly get frustrated in a moment. But it was one of these where he was frustrated when the series ended, had a conversation, went out there and had a much better series the next time around. And it's not like he had a bad series. The defense just gave him some issues and did a good job of, corking guys up and not allowing them to have stuff down the field. He's in complete control. The best thing that Jordan Travis does in a practice setting, and I mentioned this yesterday, he doesn't give away free candy. He's not making foolish, dumb decisions, bad passes, or gambling too much with a throw where he's giving defenses opportunities to take the ball away. He'll live to play enough play, and he'll hit enough plays at a high enough rate that offense is very, very prolific when he's out there.
He's just so good. I mean, we don't have to rehash a ton of it. Like we've glowed. We've expressed a lot of praise and just pride in what Jordan Travis has become. Well documented his growth as we've talked about it over the years on this podcast. And he looks like what you want a top 10 quarterback, or a team's top 10 quarterback to look like. He's confident, he's poised, he's in control, he's under control. What's nice, you mentioned the improvisation skills, Chris, and he's always had that, right? Like since the first moments we saw him, like that was one thing that wasn't in doubt was his athleticism, his ability to make plays. But like as he continues to develop and what we've seen like this camp is the improv skills aren't just him running around to do something crazy like he did against Florida last year with his feet. It's him running around and keeping his eyes downfield and being able to then press the ball or push the ball downfield or even just make a check down pass, but make something to extend the play, keeping himself preserved, and just adding total stress to the defense. So that's really good. It's something that I'm excited by. It's a good development for FSU. Continuation of what we saw last year from Jordan Travis, I think, is very reasonable. That's a really great sign. Don't want to undermine that. Talking about the other quarterbacks, I think they're like a legitimate battle for who is QB2. I ultimately think it will be Tate Rodemaker. I thought that going into this season or into preseason camp. Nothing that I've seen leads me to believe. I think Tate has actually been pretty dang solid for the most part this camp. I haven't seen a ton of bad, head scratching decisions. I will say though, I think the big storyline is Brock Glenn, right? And it's him being a true freshman, being very deliberate in his decision making, but not slow with it. And so he sees it, he makes a good read. He doesn't make a whole lot of boneheaded decisions. He gets rid of the ball quickly. And so it's this very quick yet deliberate combination of processing. I know those two kind of counteract each other, but he's very controlled. And for someone of his age, I think he has a lot of poise, a lot of moxie. You see why FSU, Chris, was so excited to get him and flip him from Ohio State, why Tony Tokars and the rest of the coaching staff continued to go after him even after he didn't commit to them over the summer. I think as you project out beyond this year, that's what we're really looking at is what he can be. And I don't know. Are you buying on Brock Glenn, being a guy who's going to have a really good chance to start here in a year or two? Because I think that's, I know Luke Kromenhoek's down the pipe, but everything I've seen from Brock Glenn since spring through camp, man, thumbs up. It looks really good.
Yeah, I view QB2 as a two-part discussion. One is immediate QB2 if needed this year. I think that's Tate. I think they're comfortable with him. He's comfortable with the offense. He's done a fairly good job throughout the preseason. He's got the ability to make some high-level throws because he does have a big arm. He's improved as a short and intermediate passer. He's done a very good job when he's rolling to certain directions and throwing. There's things that are strengths for him that he's strengthened even more. Long term, yeah, I think Brock Glenn has everything capable competing for and taking that job if he wants to. Quick trigger, can make a variety of high-level throws. Very comfortable making very difficult throws, not being scared of making a mistake, which is refreshing for a young guy. I think that's a tough thing for young guys to balance is show that you have the ability, but also don't make a blunder that's going to hurt your team. I think Brock's done a very good job of balancing that through 15 spring practices and now 8 preseason practices. Yeah, I like him a heck of a lot. I think he's got a real shot. I've talked repeatedly in the past about I thought it was good for him to come in to push AJ Duffy. I think he's done more than just push AJ Duffy personally.
Yeah, people are going to ask about AJ Duffy, and there's moments where AJ does show a live arm and it's there. I think Brock does some of the processing things in the quick trigger and Mike Norvell's offense, which is really important, especially at its baseline. If you're not Jordan Travis and you have the ability to scramble around and make plays, I think Brock is advanced beyond AJ Duffy in terms of processing and getting rid of the ball quickly.
Yeah, Duffy had a throw. I think it was on Tuesday, might have been Wednesday. It's when we were still in Tallahassee, where he hit a 30-yarder right at the pylon. Perfect throw, put it up in the air, let the guy run under it. Nice pitch and catch, high level throw. He is fully capable of doing that. The issue with AJ Duffy that I have personally watching him in a practice setting consistently, I've had this issue with him throughout the last 2 years. There's just too much hesitancy too often. There's times where he can throw a guy open. He's just not willing to. And I just don't think he can play quarterback at a high level at a place like this that likes to throw the ball in the manner it likes to throw it and be effective doing that. Is he capable of it? Yes. I just haven't seen him kind of develop, might not be the right word, but showed a willingness to do certain things that need to be done at that position that make me comfortable thinking he's the guy that could be the next to carry the baton in life after Jordan Travis.
I tend to agree with that, Chris. And to finish up the Brock Glenn conversation before we move on, just a little bit of context. We were speaking very highly of him. Still a true freshman. There was a play in Jacksonville, I think the first day in Jacksonville, where they were backed up in the goal line, so about 2 yards out from their own goal line, or not goal line, their own end zone. The opposite being by the goal line.
He took a safety.
Yeah,
and the quarterback coach wasn't very happy about him taking a safety.
And the quarterback coach, not usually super heated. Tony Tokars is more mild-mannered, I think, as far as coaches go, and he wasn't happy. Brock Glenn basically just ate a safety. I don't know how else to describe it. He rolled out.
It was a simple throw it away. He was outside of where he had to be outside of. Just throw it away.
And then it's cool. It's you see the dynamic as far as coaching, and that's why I love being at practice, because we get to see that stuff as much as we get to evaluate players. We get to see Tony Tokars lose his mind, and then a few minutes later, pull Brock to the side and they have a constructive conversation. And that's coaching, that's teaching, right? As long as you're consistent with your messaging, that's what it should look like. But those are the things you're going to why, again, the context is I'm not saying Brock Glenn is the guy you want to be playing for you as your backup to Jordan Travis immediately this season. because there's going to be a lot of inexperience that you're going to have to sift through, things like that. You're going to have to learn on the job. So that's not what you ideally want. You want to position to get a lot of good reps this season in practice, maybe play in 4 games if you get enough blowouts. But yeah, hopefully that this is more of a setting up for something in 2024 where he's able to build a lot of practice reps and get that under him and then have a legit chance to vie for the starting job as a redshirt freshman.
Yeah, on the flip side of the safety play that he had yesterday, or I think that was Thursday. On Friday, he had back-to-back throws to Preston Daniels that were perfect to the end zone. Preston did not handle the first one, dropped it. For a young quarterback, sometimes that would be kind of one of those moments of like, oh man, you're making me look bad, or oh man, we should have had that one. And they don't, possibly respond as well. They basically went back to the same exact type of route, same exact type of play, and same player, Preston Daniel. They nailed it again. Great throw, completed. I just thought it was, response is a culture word around these parts, and I thought it was a good example of that.
Let's move on to running back. It's a fun group. It's a deep group. It's a versatile group. Trey Benson is Trey Benson. Like, I don't want to take for granted what he is and what we think he'll be. Coach Johnson calls him Fat Boy now because he's a little bit bigger, but I don't think it's a bad big. There was a play on Friday, Chris, where he got the ball in the flat, caught it cleanly, and then turned up field, and you're like, yep, that's Trey Benson. Like, that violent, controlled speed was pretty evident. But let's talk about some of the other guys in addition to Trey Benson. I think we go into the year expecting Trey Benson, to be your workhorse, your RB1. But the rest of the group is what I'm interested in, kind of parsing out and seeing who fits in where, what roles they'll have.
Yeah, it's an interesting group. Lawrence Toafili feels like a guy that they've worked hard to build into more of a complete back. And I don't know that's necessarily needed. I think Toafili is very good at certain things. We know what he can do out of backfield as a catcher. We know what he can do in the open field. I think he's worked pretty hard to improve as an in-between the tackles kind of runner, to his credit. But you also got Rodney Hill, who we're all very high on. And he had a little bit of a slow start to the preseason, but I thought he had a very good day yesterday, Friday in Jacksonville. I think he's been better this week than he was in the first few days, for example. And then Keziah Holmes has been kind of not a pleasant surprise, but he's taken a next step. He's got himself
he's been a pleasant surprise. He's been fun.
But I think we always knew he had some capability, that he wasn't just a guy that he threw onto the roster just to throw him on the roster. He has got himself in really good shape, which is a credit to him. It's also a credit to the fact that he's now actually been in the program for more than like 10 minutes when he arrived last August. And he just does a really good job taking good tracks, running the ball. He is a guy he's a big body that also has some really fun shiftiness to it. So there are moments he does stuff in practice. There was one day in Tallahassee earlier this week where he pops one to the outside and he throws a very quick and somewhat violent stiff arm to the face mask. I think of Jabril Rawls. It was definitely a DB trying to close out on the play. And it was just like, it was very almost nonchalant, but it's one of those things like in a game, those stack up, those physical moments for a running back. He's a guy that we had kind of been thought would get a handful of touches maybe per game on average. I feel like what he's done in the preseason makes you maybe recalculate that to a certain degree.
And that's where when I guess I'm speaking for myself as a pleasant surprise. I thought he'd be like maybe a power back this year, but there's more than power to where there's glimpses of him being a very complete back with some explosive traits that I didn't know necessarily existed. The stiff arm, Chris, you mentioned the one example of it. And since we saw that one, I just pay a little closer attention now. I'm like, oh, this dude's throwing a stiff arm every single time someone gets near him. Like, that's everyone has their default move. LT has the dead leg. If you're playing NCAA 14 as much as me on PlayStation 3, the X button is a stiff arm, and he's just like a 5-year-old just triggering the X button over and over again. So anytime someone comes near him, powerful stiff arm. Seems to be an effective tool. I'm excited to see that in a live setting in a game to see if he actually embarrasses someone. Last thing I'll say on the running backs, I'm very optimistic on Lawrence Toafili. I wasn't like super quick to buy some of the hype that some were like bestowing on him last season. I think he's a really good, useful gadget weapon. But like what I'm seeing this camp, and we saw it a little bit in the spring too, is that Chris alluded to, more signs of being a complete back. I don't know if it's needed either, Chris, like with what you have in your arsenal. Like, I don't know if LT is going to be a 10 carry a game guy, maybe a 10 touch per game guy with passes and stuff too. But what I like is he does seem to be running more best way I could describe it is naturally. Like I wrote about it, like talked about pad level. Like he just seems a little bit more under control as he runs in traffic now. And that's been consistent throughout preseason camp. How that manifests itself to like yards per carry and efficiency during the season, yeah, I'm not entirely sure yet. I just know I feel like he's trending in a good direction and gives me further confidence in the running back room and the depth and the skill set and the versatility they have there. Not the forgotten man, like CJ Campbell will play some capacity this season. Special teams, gadgety stuff, I'm not entirely sure, but he's your fifth guy. And I feel really good about CJ Campbell as your fifth guy. Like it is a really good running back group with a lot of versatility. It will be a strength for this team. I think that's very, very clear. I know they don't have Trayshawn Ward this season. I think you're going to miss him in some ways. I think in other ways you're going to have more explosiveness, and that's kind of the trade-off. You may not have that guaranteed 5 to 6 yards to carry that you had with Trayshawn, but you might have more home run hitters across the board. Let's talk about pass catchers, Chris. I think this is a place where we'll probably park and talk for a few minutes because of all the new additions in addition to what's returning. And what's returning is a 6'7", 240-pound freak of nature and Johnny Wilson. And he was maybe the most improved player in the spring, and he was already starting from a pretty high standpoint, and he's even better in this preseason camp. Like, he just looks so under control and fluid in his movements. The catching's pretty consistent. We talk about J-Trav kind of feeling like he's in command of things. I feel Johnny Wilson's a similar track for how he's handling the wide receiver position.
Yeah, so like when I think of Johnny, I think of the fact that when I'm watching practices and they're doing 7-ons or 11-ons, that you just go, oh yeah, throw it to John, like it's there. And we wrote about the sort of quick route on the outside that he had to catch the other day where Mike Norvell was going unstoppable. Yesterday there was one in Jacksonville where I believe it was Yak yelled something like Birdman open or something like that, and they hit him in the back of the end zone. Nice high placement on the ball, but not like a jump ball. Just get his hands up and high, something made for that man's long length and catch radius. Johnny's been outstanding. The nicest thing about the wide receiver group now with Johnny, and it's not like they were a bunch of slappies last year, but Keon Coleman's a special cat. Quick hands, quick feet, super silky smooth, working down the field. And, man, he will go up and get it. He's a kid that we talk about Dre Jacobs, for example. I remember in spring saying my favorite thing about Dre Jacobs is he has a desire to go get the ball when it's in the air. Keon Coleman has that same factor with an even better body and skill set from an athleticism standpoint than a guy like Dre Jacobs.
When they got Keon Coleman this offseason, we celebrated it at a pretty profound level because we thought it was a really big freaking deal at the time. And I think that's just being reinforced with what we've seen in the preseason. We had heard really good stuff in the offseason as well that was encouraging. And also, doesn't take a genius. You see him walk by, and you're like, oh, yeah, that'll play. But now you get to see the movement skills. And Chris mentioned this, like the fluidity at his size at 6'4", 215. I mean, it's out there, like in the portion of practices that are open to video. Like he's doing some work returning punts. I don't know if he's going to be your punt returner. We're not going to talk about depth chart stuff on here. But 6'4", tracking the ball and catching it like that and moving that well after, like, okay, like that has a chance to play and be someone who can help you beyond just being a wide receiver. Speaking of like him helping out and just being beyond a wide receiver, there's a great play on Friday at Jacksonville where they get the ball to a little slip to the tight end, gets in the open field, and there is a 6'4", 215-pound hulking presence downfield blocking really hard to the point where like, it ends up being a touchdown. And after the play, like about 5 or 6 offensive coaches went running over to Keon Coleman at different positions. Offensive line coaches, Yak was there. Like there's multiple coaches went running over to celebrate with Keon Coleman to reinforce like that kind of buy-in.
Yeah,
they've talked about him being very smart, Chris, right, and very like studious. There's a lot there to like about Keon Coleman. I dare say he might be a more well-rounded player than Johnny Wilson. I don't know about better, but I think he does more things than Johnny does.
Keon Coleman has plenty of ego, and it's not a bad thing in his case because he backs it up. But to his credit, the most impressive thing to me through 8 practices with Keon Coleman, it's the way he's willing to be coached and talked to. We've talked about when him and Jordan Travis would have a miscue or a mistake on a route, they would have a conversation, and they would be looking at the video board, the replay board that FSU has, in their practices in Tallahassee. And they would have a good conversation. Keon wanted to know, what did I do wrong? What do I need to do right? What do we do next time? Watching him interact with Ron Dugan, Sky Lemonier, Mike Norvell, plenty of others, it's impressive because it's a dude who knows he's really stinking good. He's here for 6 to 8 months ago pro. Like, he makes no bones about that. He's super direct about that. But on the flip side of that, he's also super receptive. And that's a great quality in a dude who has as much talent and capability as he does, but he also puts on display on the regular. Him and Fentrell Cypress, and I like Fentrell Cypress a ton. I think Fentrell Cypress is a 1A type of cornerback who does a phenomenal job of constantly being in the right position. They have some battles, and there have been moments where Coleman has made Cypress look like kind of a run-of-the-mill guy, and that's not to slight Fentrell Cypress. That's because Keon Coleman is that ultra impressive. So yeah, he's been awesome. I think we may have just taken the whole turning him into something and really gone above and beyond it, but he's been really, really good. And when you have him opposite Johnny Wilson, man, that's fun.
Figuring, and that's kind of the thing, like, we won't get into it, but like, they're going to still figure out how to use those guys simultaneously together, right? And that's still like in the infant process. Like, they're still figuring that out. And so, like, yes, that is an exciting thing to expect to continue to develop.
And you got guys like Winston Wright, who is phenomenal to see him back out there and look healthy, moving around.
He moves quick. Yep, that's
Destin Hill, who's done a very good job of kind of gravitating in, being in good shape, making an impact. I think Destin Hill is another guy kind of like Keon Coleman could potentially impact on special teams as a return type of guy. Those are two guys I've liked. Dre Jacobs, when he's been available and going full go, he still has Dre Jacobs moments. I think he kind of proved himself in the spring. Key thing with a guy like that, it's kind of like Darian Williamson. It's just consistently stacking good days and being able to do so. Darian
really like Petron Portier as well, and like
he's
another big weapon to have there. So
you feel really, really good about the 2 deep, your top basically 8 at the receiver position that you have capability of running out there. I don't know how often FSU will go 4 or 5 wide. I just don't think they want to be that team. I think they definitely want to have a tight end out there consistently, and obviously a back as well. So in the conversation of pass catchers, to me, it's kind of like you're looking for groups of 3.
Yeah, and how do you rotate them, and how
they've
often?
got real good options with that.
Yep, I agree. And even like if you have to get into like less experienced guys, like Josh Burrell has had some nice moments this preseason, and he's someone who needs to just stack practices together, right? But like,
Span speed's on display once in a
while.
Yeah,
Deuce Spans is kind of an afterthought, but like there's a role for him and what he can do. We saw it early last season before he got a little dinged up. Like there are things there. People want to know about like Hakeem Williams because he's a 5-star. He's just raw, guys. Like, and that was always the thought, is that he was going to be a little raw. I know it's frustrating to hear like us talk about like a Vandrevius Jacobs ahead of Hakeem Williams. I'm not particularly concerned about it. It will be a thing that we are going to have to evaluate. As he just didn't come from the most polished prep program. That was always the case. We've talked about in the pod, if you listened before, like, it was one of the appeals of him is that it spoke to his mindset and who he was and why FSU could go ahead and get him. But also, like, yeah, he's going to take a little bit of time. I'm trying to think if there's just anyone else at the wide receiver room to talk about, Chris. I think we can move on to tight ends and talk about those pass catchers.
Conversation there starts with the big 3. It's Shaheem Bell and Kyle Morlock, who are the new guys integrated in there, and then Biscuit, Marquise, and Douglas. Douglas has done a great job of kind of maintaining a very solid role in the offense, to his credit, despite those 2 guys coming in. Jaheim Bell is truly a Swiss Army knife. He can do so many different things for you. He's a guy that I feel like they are pushing a lot. Jeremiah Byers is another guy who I would put in that similar category of, like, I think everybody in the building knows how good they are and what they bring to the offense and the capability that they add to what you can be. But at the same time, they're not giving them a free lunch. Like, they want them to earn everything they're going to earn. And then with Morlock, a little bit more of a traditional type of tight end. I think the nicest thing about Kyle is I feel like he's pretty consistent. I feel like day in, day out.
Better too every week is a little bit better than the week before.
There's not moments with Kyle where I go like, man, he looks overwhelmed or it looks uncomfortable. It's usually more so like he had a sound day or he made some really big plays. Mm-hmm. That's sort of been the range for him through 8 days of practice. And then you got plenty of other dudes in that room who have a lot of experience. Preston Daniels, someone I mentioned earlier, working with Brock Glenn. I think he's a spot duty guy who's more of a special teams contributor. Jackson West is a guy who obviously has gone through a lot of injury related stuff, working his way back. I'm hoping he can get healthy and contribute in some form or fashion. They like using linebackers and tight ends a lot on special teams. So I kind of look at the depth of the tight end room as potentially providing some help there. Jarrell Powers is a guy who I feel like it's kind of a crucial preseason to figure out who he's going to be and what he's going to be in that room long term. I don't think he's a guy that's necessarily much of a contributor this coming season, but I do think it's sort of like the QB2 future discussion we had. I think Powers fits into that long term for the tight end room for life after Jaheim Bell and Kyle Morlock potentially, but Morlock has multiple.
Morlock's probably a 2-year guy.
Yeah.
Jaheim Bell's has 2 years too. Technically, I don't think that's the track that he's on.
I don't think that's his plan. Just
come on,
throwing it out there.
Support the battles and people, and you never know. You never know what you're gonna get with player retention, as we've seen. Don't discount TBE when it comes to player retention. Feel really good about the skill players. It's funny listening back to that podcast I mentioned earlier at the top of it, Chris. Last year we were talking about not feeling like great about the tight end room, or that it was like a bunch of role players in their own little pieces. And I think this year it's like you have guys who can really like create mismatches, and I think that's the biggest difference. Now you got to figure that out, right? But like, there's tools, and yes, and I'm giving a lot of thumbs up this podcast for the people watching it, but that's because this team deserves a lot of thumbs up. Offensive line, let's talk about that. Eye test, absolutely. It is probably 15 deep of college football bodies. That doesn't mean they're all polished or they're all ready to be playing college football. Don't mistake me there. But in terms of like big dudes, human beings don't look like that typically, and they got a handful of them, and that's the starting point for the conversation.
Yeah, I have it sort of a tier system. There's a 1 to 8 where the 5 starters are going to come out of that group, and you feel very good about the 3 others that are going to be potentially heavy rotational pieces. 9 and 10 for me, and I would say like a Jalen Early and a Julian Armella probably are the 9 and 10 type guys for me. They're guys that have developed well or coming along that I know the coaching staff believes in, that I think if they got in a pinch and had to play them, they'd be comfortable playing them. 11 and 15 sort of the next dudes up, the next guys down the pike. Andre Otto, I loved him as a recruit, but he's a guy that like just from he's 6'5", 330-ish type of body. He moves people. He's tough to move off a spot. Like it's fun to watch him here in these first days of him in the college game. He's an example of the guys that would be that 11 to 15 group, next group up.
You leave Jacksonville with this really small sample size of 2 days in pads being like, oh, they probably hit on Andre Otto, even though there's years of developing still to go. Like, you're like, all right, physical, mean, smart, willing, fairly quick.
Yeah. It's simple on the O-line. When they're a big body, can you get around them? And can they move enough when you do start getting around them for them to recover and deal with it? And Andre Otto has that. And the third element of it for him beyond smarts is that he is very strong. Wrestling background plays well there. As far as like the front group, I mean, we know Mo's going to be the center. It's pretty well established.
That's the one thing depth chart wise that they've tipped their hand on. Alex Atkins said that in preseason. I think Mo's look good.
Robert Scott's a guy that's kind of been glued back together, taped back together, trying to make sure he gets back to being completely healthy in every form and fashion, that he walks into September feeling good about his body and where he's at. They're doing that. When Mike Norvell talks about we have return plan for guys, a guy like a Robert Scott who was as banged up as he was during the 2022 season is a perfect definition of a player that they're handling in such a fashion. He factors into like a discussion of who plays probably on the edge. I love Jeremiah Byers. We all know that, very well established. The athleticism, the ability, it's all there. I talked about him getting no free lunches. They are definitely pushing him, making him earn everything he gets, but I think they love him. They think very highly of him. Bless Harris, a guy who obviously got banged up last year, came back late in the year. He's now full go, doing very well, comfortable. He earned a job last year for a reason. Like it wasn't a coincidence. He's a kid who was capable of doing what they want to do.
We liked him a lot in the spring. I think we were pretty much ahead of the curve on that as a collective. Knowles 24/7, like the X's and Knowles guys loved him. I think that's only been reinforced in camp. You mentioned Chris. Is a big guy hard to get around if he's playing outside, and I think that's Bless Harris. Like he is really hard to get around, and he's going to play a lot this year. I'm pretty convinced just watching him. Like there's some legitimate NFL stuff there.
Inside, you got graybeard guys like Casey Roddick, the chef. He's big body, very good. They brought him in for a reason. Worked him a lot at center in the spring, but I think ultimately he kind of settles in probably a guard role for them. I think he's an emergency type of center for them. I think center behind Mo is kind of we're going to have a lot of options. We know Darius Washington can do. He's done it in the past. Casey Roddick worked it in the spring. We've seen other guys work it. I think that's sort of one of those that they're hoping they're not going to have to concern themselves with. But if they do, they feel like they have options. Meach is only like 8 years younger than me at this point. Played a lot of football, so like they know what they got there with Dimitri. Keandre Jones is another cat who's played a lot of football. I don't think I'd probably circle him as a guy I think is probably first up, but I definitely think he's in that front 8 that helps you. Darius Washington that we mentioned as well, played a ton of football, a lot of positions. I don't know that Darius starts. I certainly could. He has started a ton of games in a Florida State uniform, but at the same time, I think Darius's greatest value is that like if you need a next guy up at pretty much any spot, he is capable of being that. He's handled that in the past, and he's prepared to be that, and he's as unselfish as they come.
When we did our most important players list, like I projected in my mind, like I think Darius is probably more likely to be your 6th offensive lineman than your 3rd or 4th. But I had him more valuable than guys who I was expecting in my mind to be your 3rd or 4th, just because he can slide into being a starter, a capable starter at 4 or 5 positions, and that's immensely valuable. So it's almost to the point where like, can Darius start? Should he start? He's been pretty good this preseason, especially like his run blocking has been markedly improved. Like he's creating space, he's getting out in space, and he's helping move guys. But like his best value might be, in my estimation, that like, especially if they're going to play 7 or 8 players in a game, like they've kind of hinted at, and Mike Norvell's talked about, his ability to go and play anywhere on the line capably, competently, is really valuable. And so, yeah, I feel really good about the 7 to 8 you mentioned, Chris. I think it's the best we've ever felt about it. And then like the neck, that Jalen Early, Julian Armella tier. I think by the end of the season, like one of those 2 guys might be in that mix as well, and probably deservedly so. Like Jalen Early, as far as like looking different, I didn't know who it was at first. He's legitimately slimmed down.
Yeah,
I
he's
think
the most transformed O lineman.
Him and maybe Lucas Simmons just going in the other direction, and adding bulk and looking great. That's a multi-year guy, but yeah, Jalen Early I think is showing like lost weight, which he had to. He was really pushed to do that. Even going into last season, he wasn't always in the best shape. Now he's got himself in better shape and hasn't lost a ton of power. So, yeah, I think you're ultimately talking about 10 guys that you do feel really good about, and we've talked about that in the past. Like that's always the magic number for you is if you can get to 10. I think you get to 10 pretty easily, right? And then you kind of figure out the rest if you have to. But like, it's not hard to get to 10 guys who you think can contribute and be competent to some extent or another.
An added bonus with the O line is that you're in a position now where you can truly develop guys. Like there is not a rush with a Lucas Simmons who is fully capable of being as good as he wants to be. And same, truthfully, with Julian Armella is like I know there were people clamoring a season ago, like why doesn't he play more, so on and so forth. I think they have plans for certain guys, and they spoke about that with Julian Armella last year. And I certainly feel the same way about Lucas Simmons. And they're going to bring them along, and they feel confident that they're going to be able to develop them into what they want them ultimately to be, but they just don't need it right now. They're not going to force time to speed up. They're going to allow it come naturally, and I think that's a good thing. They haven't had that luxury in a long time around these parts.
Yes or no answers here, Chris. All right. Did Robert Scott play as a true freshman?
Yeah, I believe so.
Did he have injuries throughout his career?
Yeah.
Did Murray Smith play as a true freshman?
Yes.
Has he had injuries throughout his career?
Yeah.
Did Darius Washington play as a true freshman?
Yeah.
Did he have injuries throughout his career?
Yeah. And O linemen naturally are going to get banged up. It comes with the job. You're hitting each other 70, 80 times in a game, on average. So it's just a natural thing. But there's a degree of like being built up to deal with that versus being thrown in a fire and having a 23-year-old hitting an 18-year-old. In college football world of 5 years of strength and conditioning, it makes a world of difference.
Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, that's the offense. I think we'll do more like season preview stuff as we get a little closer to it, but like that offense has potential to be great. Maybe even I dare say, but they were pretty close to great last year. I think you could have that conversation. I think the potential to be elite this year.
Yeah, I think I'm all aboard on the offense being capable of being a 40-point type of offense, barring the clock rules really making a drastic change with regards
which
to
we'll
that.
see.
Yeah.
And as long as knock on wood injury to key pieces, and you have luck there. Defensive side of the ball, we'll go to the trenches there. Hot damn, Jared Verse has gotten better, and I think that's very, very clear. That's not a placebo of like, oh, I think Jared Verse, I know he's good last year, I think he's going to be better. It's like, no, he's 10 pounds bigger, quicker, hands movements and pass rush skill sets are violent and scary almost to watch. And then you factor him in with Patrick Payton showing some glimpses of being strong. Braden Fisk is my man crush. Dibs on that one. I think I was dibs on it because I called it really early on, even before we knew they were recruiting him as liking
You
him.
dealt with him as a recruit, so you're good.
And then they ended up recruiting him. But like, yeah, man, like they've got 3 or 4 guys who I think are going to be able to wreak havoc as pass rushers and are going to be able to do it in different ways. And then you start talking in like the auxiliary pieces, like a Byron Turner, Gilbert Edmond, hot and cold sometimes, but like his good days are actually really, really good. He's someone who's still developing, but then we talk about like the trenches or the inside of the trenches and like Dennis Briggs. I know Chris is like the president of his fan club, and we've been bullish on him multiple years in a row now. Injuries and whatnot have been a thing, but like we were bullish on him 2 years ago, and he looked great before the cheap shot against Louisville. And I think he looks closer to that, Chris, than where he was even last year. He's been playing defensive tackle. Fabian Lovett, like we know what he's going to be and like what he is, and he's dealt with injuries the last couple seasons, but like he is dialed in, and you see how focused he is every single time he takes the practice field. Like they're just, even with the Darrell Jackson news, and we've discussed that already on the podcast, like I feel very good about the defensive line and where it's at right now. I don't know if I feel like it's an elite group, but it might be really damn good.
Yeah, I think if Darrell was in the mix, I'd go elite because his ability to be such a people mover.
Where I'm at too.
You didn't mention Josh Farmer, another very good one who's in that mix of guys you talked about. There's also a few young guys that you're starting to see more and more with. Io Tafasi has his moments where he's a pest. He's a big human who moves very fast, very violent striker. Byron Turner Jr. is a guy who I feel like has continually gotten better. I feel very confident with him as a 2 deep contributor on the edge for them, a guy that can help them a great deal behind the guys who are super established up front there as far as your starters types. Trying to think of anybody else in that group. Jaden Jones is sort of a layaway guy.
Yeah.
There's something there. I don't expect it to be a ton this year. Dante Anderson and him are kind of the next guys up after that first couple rotations at the edge. And you hope that they get a little bit more burn. Inside, a guy like KJ Sampson's getting his feet wet, getting used to it, getting that special kind of love from Odell.
KJ Sampson will be good, right? Like I'm pretty convinced of that at this point.
I like the general group of defensive linemen they have, talent and depth wise. They've got a lot of different body types that can do a lot of different things. Daniel Lyons is another guy we didn't mention. I'm a big old fan of Daniel Lyons. I feel like he's the most upright looking dude when he's standing up, but he also does a really good job getting low and exploding. He's got long arms. There's some natural stuff there for them as an interior guy that they absolutely love. I get why people that work with those rooms are bullish on him being really, really good. I'm comfortable with
Malcolm Ray. We forget about, and he looks healthy, and he wasn't healthy last year. And I'll tell you this: he put a couple. I won't say what specific move. I don't want to give stuff away, but he put a couple of nifty pass rush moves on interior linemen in one-on-ones the other day. I was like, oh, that's the specialist that you thought you were getting last year when he was dinged up. Like he will have a role and be able to help out, especially with Darrell not being available this season. Like if Malcolm Ray's your 6th guy, like how good do you feel about that? He was your 4th last year.
I look at the DL room as 2 things need to be, 3 things. Your starters need to be really good. Like the group that you're going to play the predominant amount of time has to be able to really impact the game. And I think FSU has that. You have to have the depth and versatility of the group to do different things. With what FSU likes to do defensively, where they show some unique fronts, they mix it up, they're going to try to make it they're going to change the picture on you. That's a goal of all defenses, but FSU certainly going to do it. I think they have a variety of guys to do that. Yes. And I think the third thing is when you're playing a game where you're playing 4 quarters, 60 minutes, and every snap matters, and you're playing 80 snaps, and guys are dog ass tired, do you have the depth and rotation where you can trust the fourth, fifth, sixth guy up on the interior or the third, fourth, fifth guy up on the edge to go and make a play if it has to be made? I feel pretty good about where they are with that. There's some degree of the last guy on those number counts for each of those spots having to kind of come along and develop.
Right.
But I feel like they got guys that are working towards that in a positive manner. The depth is very good.
We inherently, I'm speaking for Chris here, but trust the development part of this program too. So like, even if it's not there today, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, I'm just saying like if we have question marks on feeling great about it, I bet you we'll probably feel pretty good about it by the end of the season. It's typically how things. Have you noticed, Chris? Like I know each year has had it. I thought about this the other day. Each year has had very like obviously different outcomes: 3 wins, 5 wins, 9 wins, or 10 with the bowl game. But every single one of those seasons, one thing that's been common is they've played their best football at the end of the year.
Yeah, they tend to get better as a football team. Some of that's also like last year they got banged up pretty bad early in the year, and it affected the middle of the season. They got a little more healthy in the back end.
Yeah, and other teams got unhealthy, but I think they're like their GPS data and stuff will point to like they get faster as the year goes on and they develop. So, defensive line group, I think we feel really good about, even with the Darrell Jackson news. We would feel great about defensive line if you had Darrell Jackson. Still feel good about it. It just means you need more luck, right? That's one less injury that you can afford to really compete at the highest level. I think it probably impacts you against the LSUs, Clemson's of the world if you do find yourself playing in a really meaningful game in December. That's kind of where I think you miss Darrell Jackson, sans like major injuries among the line, but still the group is really good. It's versatile. I think there's 3 or 4 guys who can get after the quarterback at a high level on this group. You can play games, change the picture, like Chris said. It's going to be good. Linebackers. Man, Chris, you were so still there. I thought you were frozen. I was kind of rambling to see if you were moving or not. That was impressive. That was about 10 seconds of you not moving or blinking. Linebackers. We know what Tanner Bethune is. We know what Cannon DeLoach is. We know what DJ Lundy is, and DJ Lundy continues to look good. Omar Graham, we think will probably, like coaches have said, they've invested a lot of time in him. He'd be the 4th guy. So I don't think we have to belabor like a ton on that group. I think we know that it's like a solid group. Let's talk real quick about the young pieces. And we don't know if these guys will contribute this season, but more as we kind of like look at the roster outlook moving forward, a couple of the young pieces I think are worth stopping and talking about for a minute or two.
Yeah, Justin Cryer, all-out effort guy, son of a coach, works really hard. For someone who walked in here basically as practice began, he's done a good job handling it. He's earned some praise, and he's had some really good plays at moments. Blake Nicholson's a different kind of athlete in that room. He's got to get bigger, more physically developed, and that will come with time. But, like, the athleticism, the ability to trigger, that was a Brendan word for you because I like to say he triggers really well, which he does, stands out. I have not noticed Dylan Brown turn a whole heck of a lot, to be perfectly honest.
That's it. Did you read my newcomer report?
No.
I wrote, to be totally honest, I haven't observed him, but I just basically said the exact same thing you did.
I haven't. Who else is a new face in that? DeMarco Ward, who was here in the spring. He's been up and down in the preseason, and I don't think all of it's just solely on his play.
I got a name for you.
Who?
Brian Courtney.
Yeah, it's funny. Courtney, first few days, it looked pretty rough at linebacker, if I'm going to be honest.
It did.
Yesterday in Jacksonville was by far the best he has looked this preseason. He triggered a few times, got down. He did an excellent job on like a stretch element play of getting in the backfield, disrupting the back, but also staying with him as he staggered him out towards the sideline. And he kept himself squaring in front of him. He did the job as it's supposed to be done. There's a lot of development that's going to have to go in there. To some degree, you almost hope you recruit over it, and that's not a slide on Brian Courtney. It's just how you want that room to be recruited. But, yesterday was a moment of, maybe this might actually work. Like, he is a big-body athlete. And, again, sort of similar to tight end depth. A decent amount of these guys at linebacker we're talking about, I think, might help some on special teams.
And that's, I think, the appeal of Brian Courtney playing more linebackers. He probably becomes a better special teams player as a result. Let's talk about the secondary, and I think this is one of my favorite position groups to watch in the preseason and one of my favorite ones to vet because I think there's so many moving parts of when you talk about the veterans returning, transfers, newcomer types, position changes with Kevin Knowles at safety, and then the newcomers and like the actual true freshmen. So like there's a lot of like trying to figure out, okay, what fits where, how do we view it? I think the overall takeaway though is like they are going against a really good wide receiving core and they are holding their own. Let's start with Fenchel Cypress, Chris. I think in terms of like, I don't want to. Okay, so we exited spring with talking about Fentrell Cypress as like a guy we thought would be capable, right? Like, but he was also ranked as one of the top 5 transfers in the country, and I didn't necessarily quite see that. Now with him having a full off season and seeing him in preseason camp, I now see why he was rated as highly as he was, and I think he's a CB1 type of guy for you. I didn't know that. And I think that's a development that we've talked about, but like it's a significant development that probably deserves a ton of attention on our end.
When DB coaches talk to their players at their position beyond saying, go get the ball, be aggressive, finish plays, things of that sort, they usually hone in on 3 keywords: techniques, fundamentals, and play to your keys. Fentrell Cypress is phenomenal at those 3 things. He plays a position exactly how it's coached to be played. He's always competitive for balls in the air. He always uses a sideline on sideline routes as an extra defender, squeezing guys towards it. He doesn't give up releases easily. He does a good job of kind of staying in the hip pocket, getting underneath. He just plays a position wholeheartedly how it's supposed to be played. Renardo Green, to his credit, has developed into a guy who also does that in an extremely good manner. And Renardo Green is ultra aggressive towards the ball. Renardo Green, probably of all DBs, does the best job of playing through the end of the play. In the sense of where if like a guy catches the ball, say Johnny Wilson catches it, high points it, Renardo's not going to be able to high point it because, well, Jesus liked Johnny more than he liked Renardo and made Johnny taller. But when Johnny's bringing that thing down, Renardo's going to try to fight through the ball, knock it loose, jar it loose. He does a great job of doing things like that, and that's a credit to him developing as a player at the position. Feel great about those 2 living life on the island. A.Z. Thomas is a guy who's been much better in the preseason than we saw in the spring. We came to find out he was banged up in the spring. He definitely looks healthy. It's made a difference. Feel really, really good about that. Talked about the safeties. We know, Dent and Brown are kind of the guys that have been wholeheartedly pushed to the forefront. KP, Kevin Knowles moved back there and is a very good addition to give you a top 3. We know they like having 3 guys they can rotate to some degree back there that they can rely upon that are veteran types. Feel good about that. Whole lot of young guys in the mix there. Jabril Rawls, I really like how he competes in practices. Conrad Hussey, Edwin Joseph, even though I confuse their numbers constantly.
What number's which? Let's stop right now.
Oh, no, we're not doing that.
Conrad Hussey is...
Joseph's further down the hill.
Okay.
Hussey's 12, correct?
Chris has got it. I think
I'm getting there.
We've trained it. There's been a lot of at-bats and reps testing Chris. He's got it.
But, man, Hussey yesterday in Jacksonville, he got 2 picks. Only one of them counted because, when I guess they rolled, he landed out of bounds, which I believe he did. It was pretty much right in front of me. It looked like he had. But, man, his closing speed, his ability to get to the spot for the one where he landed out of bounds, it caught your attention. Like, it was one of those moments where you go, oh, yeah. Like, you knew he was a good athlete. You knew what he was capable of. We talked a lot when he committed, and even as we were talking leading up in the summer about safety position and stuff, that he had the athleticism necessary. It wholeheartedly showed in that moment.
You know who his ball skills and range remind me of? It's going to be a former Gator, but it's got a little bit of that to him.
I don't know. Who are you going with?
Reggie Nelson, former first-round draft pick.
Eraser, right? Mm-hmm. That was the Eraser.
Got that kind of range and athleticism. Very much showed the blue chip recruit, I think, from a skill set perspective.
Yeah, Ashland Barker, phenomenal at playing down. There's some linebacker elements to his play that definitely stand out as a guy who may potentially develop into that as his body continues to mature.
Which they always said, recruited him with that being a possible.
They've talked about that. Yeah. And I like him at safety. Greedy Vance, Greedy is greedy. He's a pest. And I use that in a loving way, but he gets after the ball. He stays on people. He's the kind of guy that like we talk about Dre Jacobs and Keon Coleman attacking the ball in the air as receivers. Greedy Vance is the kind of guy that almost attacks the receiver and the ball in the moment of the catch. Like, he just does such a good job of making it like uncomfortable for guys to catch in tight spaces. And that's a credit to him. Greedy's worked hard too. He's become a better football player since he stepped on campus. He looks
quicker. And I think what we saw at him at the end of last season is kind of where he's picked up, which he was very good at the end of last season. So
J-Dub, another guy having a very good preseason.
Yeah. Very confident in himself and deserved confidence, I would say.
I think Pat's been a beneficial thing for that room, Coach Sertan. I think he's done a good job. I think the guys like him. I think they listen well to him. I also think that that group as a whole has some really good leadership to it. To Shaheem Brown's credit, I think Shaheem's come a really long way as like an outspoken guy who takes well to coaching. And he worked hard to do a little bit with his body this offseason. He did a good job with it. Akeem Dent's been around the block for a long, long time. Bernardo's a guy who's taken to coaching really, really well. I think Fentrell's a bit of a quiet cat, but I think guys understand that he's about the business, and he does a very good job of that. In general, I like the way that group's composed. I feel like they're rowing in the same direction as a whole.
We went over a bunch right then. There's so much to get to with that group. One name that you didn't mention, and I know you're how you feel about him, so it's easy to forget about when you're talking about 10 to 12 different guys. Quindarius Jones, true freshman cornerback. He is, Chris, I think you described him as pesky the other day.
Kevin Little should probably beam in right now because he's officially the president of that fan club.
Yeah,
because he came to the elite camp last year where he earned the offer and basically committed to it.
Yeah, Kev showed up, hates covering recruiting, doesn't think it's valuable, helps us out. His first month on the job, says, "Oh, that dude's really good," and Kev deserves a round of applause for that. He now has replaced the Tate Rodemaker Heisman Trophy Photoshop, crass, poorly done Photoshop with Quindarius Jones over the Heisman.
Length and athleticism is what's beautiful about Quindarius. He does a phenomenal job of being able to play with anybody from an athletic standpoint.
And to go with that, he is a competitive. He does not back down. There's times where he's overly competitive, where I think he gets out of position in coverage because of it.
I think the Johnny Wilson bomb that FSU put up on socials a few days ago, I believe that was caught on Quindarius.
Yeah, and that was just poor situational awareness. Not a great idea. That was the one place he couldn't allow the guy to get leverage on him, and he allowed it. And that's why he's a true freshman. And everything when we talk about the rookies is with the context and the lens of can they play this year? Maybe. How comfortable are you? And when can you play them? But from a skill set and mental makeup standpoint, he will be a good player for FSU. And I think he might be a cornerback one guy in a couple of years. He's good. You mentioned Edwin Joseph briefly. I think sneakily he might be the best of that DB group. It's just he is in the right place consistently. They have him playing slot corner, which they talked about. It's a very hard position to play. He plays it at a high level. He's physical. He forces quarterbacks to make really difficult throws on him, and he actually forces the throws to be bad throws because he's in such good coverage. You go long, or you try to put it to where only your guy can get it, and it becomes a less efficient throw. And the length, the foot speed, the mental makeup there as a slot corner, I don't think he's. We can't talk about depth chart stuff, and this is just a solely just a gut feeling. I think he has the best track to be someone who's playing by the end of the year of the true freshman. There's a lot there that I like. It's not super flashy. It looks like what I wanted a nickel corner to look like modern football.
I think I'd take Hussey in that debate, which is crazy because I really like the top three safety guys.
We haven't talked about KJ Kirkland.
Yeah.
He might be the most ready of the safeties.
There's so many DBs. It's funny, when I talked to Pat the day before the preseason started and did the interview with him, I forgot Greedy Vance wholeheartedly as we were going over guys. And I realized it after the fact, but I wasn't going to go double dip because he wanted to get out of the room like every other coach. And I wanted to wrap up the day.
To be fair, I was the COVID king that week, and you and Brett were scrambling to try to get everything we could that day.
It's funny, whenever you discuss the DBs, it feels like you try to remember everyone, and then you forget somebody, and then you realize, why did I forget that guy? But yeah, KJ Kirkland, sort of in the Barker, Hussey, Kirkland, those three being discussed as a group. I feel like Kirkland is the perfect blend of the middle of those two. He's a really good athlete, not quite as athletic as maybe Hussey. Hussey's pretty freaking special athlete, but he's also kind of big like Barker, bigger than Hussey. So he's kind of the smack dab guy in the middle, and I like him, and they like him. He's a mature kid, very hard worker, and he's
been here for a while too. He's been here since the spring.
He got 10 spring practices in before he got banged up a little bit and missed a little bit at the end there. I think that's been talked about. I think I'm fine there. I don't think I'll be getting a phone call.
It was in the spring at this point.
And I think he talked about it recently when he talked in Jacksonville. But he's a guy that's he's comfortable, and he's credited a lot of guys in that room, the older guys, of doing a good job of working with guys in that room. And I think that's the biggest change for that room as a whole, is that it just feels like, not that they didn't like each other or something, but that they just all work really well together, that they are truly a very bonded group. It's almost like the running back room, where everybody wants everybody to eat and do well, and like dudes understand their roles and they're good at it. And that's what the DB room feels like.
Kevin Knowles constantly coaching up Conrad
Yes.
Husky, and Kevin is, and they've talked about that he's playing more safety right now, and he probably can play a bunch of positions this year, but like that's a new position for him, and he is taking someone who's like gunning for his role. Like Conrad Husky is someone that has the talent to be your third safety this year if he figures out the playbook, and KP's constantly coaching him up, constantly. Like it is. Dane wrote about this in the practice report the other day. It was a great observation that Hussey on Thursday had an interception, but he was in the wrong place, and KP's watching it. And even as the play's like developing, he's like kind of putting his hands over, so like, oh, like frustrated that he's not doing the right thing. Everyone's going and giving Hussey high fives and patting his helmet after the interception. KP was having none of it because, in Kevin Knowles is KP. And he was having none of it because it was the process was poor. The result was good, but the process was poor. Compare that to the interception that he had the other day when he went across the field, or the near interception that Chris mentioned earlier, where he showed this fantastic range to go all the way across the field to get a pick. KP was like, okay, that's what it's supposed to look like. But yeah, it was probably for the first year and a half or so the most immature room on the roster. I don't think that's like harsh to say. That there's guys getting suspended, and a lot of guys have transferred out now from that group, and it was a problem for them for a while. It does not feel that way. We're early, games haven't been played yet, right? But it doesn't feel that way anymore. It feels like a nice cohesive group. Even watching Pat Surtain and Adam Fuller interact with each other, I saw Pat said something that made Adam Fuller laugh during practice. Adam Fuller laughed during practice, Chris. He probably doesn't want that out there. I don't think he wants people knowing that he can giggle and enjoy himself while he's coaching. But I like what I've seen there. It's encouraging. So collective sum of the pieces on defense feel very good right now. Special teams, kicking game has not been problematic. I think Jacksonville on Friday was their worst day, where they both had live kicks hit. Both went 1-2.
Yeah,
hit the field goal post. To be fair, that's a really weird situation for kicking. It's not a standard field goal post. It's like behind a fence, and it's not in the end zone. It's bizarre. In general, kicking has been very, very smooth this preseason, been far better than it was during the spring. We'll obviously see what happens when bullets fly and it gets more live. And but yeah, Ryan Fitzgerald and Tyler Keltner have both been pretty good. I think they've been good for each other. I have less anxiety about that than I did going into the season, and that's a good thing. So
I feel like Ryan has struck the ball very well consistently.
Yeah,
it's been very good consistently, and that with kickers, it's like a golf swing is how it's always been described to me. I don't know diddly about kicking, but it's always been described as like, is it consistent, like each time, day over day, and it has been for him in general, which is a good thing, because there has been times in the past where one day he would strike it really well, other days it kind of felt like he was kicking knuckleballs. So yeah, that's the other thing. The other thing on special teams, and we've talked a bit about it, punt return, we mentioned Coleman, Hill, LT, Lawrence Toefield is another guy who's worked there. I think AZ Thomas has gotten some work there. Trey Jacobs is another guy that's gotten some work there. They're going to have to figure it out. I presume first scrimmage for the record is Sunday evening. I presume they'll try to have some live reps of that again. Those will be the moments that help them sort it out more and more. If I'm picking a favorite just from watching it personally, I'm leaning towards 4 or 7, Coleman or Hill.
Yeah, I was against the idea of a 6'4" punt returner a week ago, and I've kind of come off that opinion to where I like the way Keon Coleman attacks the ball. Also, the way modern punt returns are, you're really not getting a whole lot of room now, and so like
Brendan likes the fall forward theory with Keon Coleman.
I like if he falls forward, you get half of what you want already. So if he makes one guy miss and falls forward, it's a successful return. So we will see. Let's play a little bit of Buy or Sonnone. We've already got an hour here. Don't want to
brought to us by the Turner Group.
It's by the Turner Group. It is by the Turner Group. Colin and Amy Turner, FSU grads. big FSU fans, and they do an amazing job with helping people find their dream homes or sell their non-dream homes. And they do it throughout Central Florida, but really throughout the state of Florida. They continue to set up shop here in Tallahassee and get stronger roots here in Gainesville as well. So they're expanding. They do a ton of business despite being a smaller agency because of how diligently they work. Super well connected Colin is, very creative. You watch his Instagram and just the way he goes ahead and networks and makes things happen. So yeah, if you're, I know it's a weird time with the markets kind of shifting, but if you want to get an idea of what it would look like, what the Turner Group could do for you, if you don't have someone who you feel confident in helping you find your dream home, give the Turner Group a chance and see where they can help you out. Reach out to Colin at 407-403-8546. You can email them at getstarted@theturnergroup.com. Mention on the bench, let them know that we sent you. That'll help us out and let them know that our word is spreading. And apparently it is, because they are having people starting to tell them they've heard about it on the podcast. So once we get them to actually buy or sell a home through OTB, it'd be the house that OTB built. And that just only feels right, Chris. Let's get into it. I'll go kind of rapid fire here. Buyer Sonnone, this is from Doc Holiday 11. With the absence of Daryl Jackson, Brandon Fisk ends up first team all ACC by year's end.
I'll buy.
I think Brandon Fisk is going to stuff the stats this year. I'm with you. I'll buy. Next up from Newton Knoll, board insiders exist.
I'll buy. There's people that know things out there. I'm not one of these people that likes to always shoot down that people know things. What irks me in that realm is when it's just the telephone game.
Yeah, if you're going to call it, call it. I think I'll buy board insiders exist. There are a lot of people on our message board who are very knowledgeable and plugged into the FSU community. I think the most knowledgeable ones are the ones who don't advertise it. And I think that's my caveat to that question. Let's see. The Apex null, Buyer Sonnone. Fabian Lovett is on the field for the first defensive snaps of the season.
I'll buy.
The expectation is for him to play against LSU.
Mike Norvell has had, the man who does not like talking injuries, has had 2 instances here through 8 days. Well, 3, including the preseason practice interview, of talking about the team being very healthy and return plans for guys. He is telling you guys without telling you guys about certain guys.
How about the Jacksonville media getting Mike all nice and
Next question.
Buyer Sonnone from NRG Knoll. Buyer Sonnone Dane.
Oh. I'm going to Sonnone Dane because that man got torched in Jacksonville. I know Dane would complain about my driving if he was here because of one instance at an agricultural way station.
Two instances.
But like we tried. You tried to tell him to put on sunscreen. We're wearing hats out there. Nope. He walks out there. The only part of the upper half of Dane's head that's white currently is where his strap of his name tag was. The rest of it pure red. So I'm selling Dane. Dane's he's gotta figure these things out. It's all good. We were all once young. No, I love Dane.
Dane is a keen football mind. I'm buying Dane all day, every day. Let's go down here. Brandon Fisk question. Noah 89 Nation, Buyer Sonnone. Norvell runs your butt, my butt, over before the end of the year. It seems to be trending that way.
I'll also know that I don't think he'd want to put himself into an injury risk for somebody like you.
What's that supposed to mean? Big Buford Knoll, Buyer Sonnone. LSU's DBs are in for a long night in Orlando. I'm going to buy that. I'm very optimistic about this wide receiving group.
I'll buy in the sense I'm optimistic about FSU's receiver group. I'll also honestly share I've not yet dived in wholeheartedly on LSU.
Apparently LSU's DBs are kind of a mixed bag right now. I think they feel really good about their front 7. I think the back group, not as much.
Yeah, I think they were the group going into camp, kind of like we've talked about safeties, where they've kind of talked about that group being, you got to figure out the pieces, who's good. They had a pretty bad injury already in that group too, from what I understand.
FSU Knowles 90210. We will be able to run outside zone this year. First off, you have to say Buyer Sonnone. Secondly, FSU ran outside zone at an elite level last year, so buy.
Yeah, buy. I mean, they don't love it like they love counter, but they still love it.
Wild at heart, Noel, Buyer Sonnone. One of the O-line of the future starts by end of year. Example given: Simmons, Armella, early. Sonnone for me, but I think rotation starting reps is a buy.
Yeah, I'm going to Sonnone it because my hope is the injuries don't pile up to the point where you got to get there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a long ways to get there, and it's not an indictment on the young guys. I think it's indicator of the depth that we've talked about earlier in the pod. Georgia Southern Knoll, Sonnone, sponsored by
The Turner Group.
Florida State has a better chance of flipping Jeremiah Smith if Bryve Hartline leaves than they do of flipping JoJo Schrader if Miami has a disappointing season. All right, you ready for this, Chris?
Yeah, go ahead. You take it first.
Bye. And here's the reason. I feel that FSU has done exactly what it needs to do to flip Jeremiah Smith if Hartline becomes unstable with Ohio State. I'm not even including like the JoJo Schrader stuff. I don't necessarily feel great about. I thought JoJo Schrader was going to commit a month back, 2 months back to Florida State. I feel like he's more of a wild card to me, to where I'm not going to be able to predict that one confidently. I think the track that FSU is headed for Jeremiah Smith has some shades of the Hakeem Williams recruitment, obviously at a higher level, but where he keeps showing up, he's developing a good relationship. If Brian Hartline leaves, that's a big if. If that happens, I think FSU becomes the front runner for that, based on everything we have right now here, knowledge-wise, on August 12th.
Yeah, I don't love the question structure. I think FSU likes both of those guys, but I think Jeremiah Smith is sort of a KJ Bolden type for them, where they are wholeheartedly all the way invested in that recruitment and laying. You like to say they're buying lottery tickets with each visit. I think that's a nice way of phrasing it. I think FSU is fully invested in trying to position themselves as good as possible to maybe eventually somehow close that. Do I think Jeremiah Smith flips? I don't. But if circumstances there change, I think FSU has positioned themselves extremely well.
I think that's fair. Baker Boys 05, Sonnone, you feel better about safety as after seeing the freshman in fall camp? Bye.
Yeah. I was high on Hussey before he stepped on campus, but like the last 2 days in Jackson, I thought were really, really good for him. And I like Barker and I like KJ Kirkland. I feel like I almost don't view KJ Kirkland as a new safety, and the kid's only been here in activity for about 18 practices. So
what's the name? Blanking on it. What was the name of the we talked about the other day, the UAB safety?
Jalen Key.
Remember the freak out when they did not get Jalen Key to be their third safety? And it was a context moment of like, hey, it's the third safety. Yes, important, would be really nice to have, but was not the end of the world in our estimation if you lost in Alabama. Seeing what they've gotten from their safety group among the freshmen, like, yeah, there's more variables there because they're younger, but I feel, and with Kevin Knowles into the mix as well, I feel pretty good about the group. I still wish the top end of the group was like, I wish I felt better about Akeem Dent and Shaheem Brown than I do at this moment. But I don't feel bad about them. I feel fine with everything else around them. That's what I'm more concerned of at this point. It's the top end of the group than the depth, which I don't think was the case going into the spring. Does that make sense?
I asked Norvell yesterday at the beginning of his press conference about young safeties, and he talked a little bit about having confidence in that group and it impacting some decisions that they had with the portal. Obviously, they did pursue some in the portal. Jalen Key's a name we've brought up. There were one or two other safeties, but they weren't just essentially trying to land a safety to land the safety. They recruited a certain few that they liked, but they weren't desperate, I guess is a good way of describing that.
A Roomba ate my feet. Sonnone brought to you by
the Turner Group.
FSU's short yardage goal line offense rushing attack will be greatly improved this season. Bye.
I'll buy. I think it was a focus of efforts during the offseason, both from a recruiting standpoint and the type of players they got who can move the ball in that position.
Sonnone from Bad Bean. Dane refuses sunscreen the next time you offer him. To be fair, he took it on Friday. He accepted the sunscreen. He applied it in a really slow manner that irritated me. Dane knows that it irritated me, so I'm not saying anything he didn't know. It was like this, Chris. It was like just little daps.
Yeah.
And after like 4 minutes, I was like, well, what? We got practice going. What's happening?
I mean, Dane's like me. He does not like the candy-coated shell feeling that sunscreen brings about in life. But I also don't think he very much enjoyed getting torched on Thursday.
I got pet peeve, like when people are like, "Oh, I don't like going to the hospital." Well, no shit, man. You think anyone enjoys going to the hospital? It means something bad is happening or has happened. Like no one likes it, but sometimes you got to do things. Sunscreen. will help keep you out of the hospital. No one likes feeling yucky. I understand why people don't like me on the podcast. Savannah Bandana, Buyer Sonnone, Destin Hill will end the regular season with more receptions than Winston Wright. Sonnone.
Yeah, I think I'd Sonnone it too. But I think both will be impact players.
Finishing up here, we have 3 pages to get to this, but we're already at an hour and 15 minutes, and most of you probably checked out. Buyer Sonnone, we averaged more than 40 points per game this year. Chris, you mentioned 40-point club earlier.
I'm right at that number. I do want to see how the clock rule impacts. I think the ACC official that spoke at kickoff said he expected like 7 to 8 less plays per game. I can't recall if that was per team or total plays. I think FSU's going to hover right at that number. Was it 40 or more? Because if it is, I'll buy. If it's more than 40, I'd probably say no.
I think it was more than 40. All right, I'm on page 2 here, skimming through. J-Rod, 31, Buyer Sonnone, is kicking field goals and fielding punts important to you? It is. Very important to me. I feel a little bit better about one of those right now. Chevy, no play, Buyer Sonnone. Our roster can stack up against the elites like Georgia, Michigan, Bama, and Ohio State.
I would Sonnone that. I think they're just on that next tier after that at this point. Those schools have more multi-year development players within their system who are high-level impact reserves. FSU's done a good job of kind of filling in the middle space with transfers and building a really good roster. FSU's roster is capable of competing with those teams. I just don't, not to go Dabo on us, but if they played 10 times, I don't know how I'd feel about FSU's odds of being the victor more often than not.
I do remember thinking that, I guess because I think you could beat them. I remember thinking the Keon Coleman edition took it from like 1% or 1 out of 10 to maybe like 3 or 4 out of 10. I think you could. I think you have a path doing so that could be replicable, if that makes sense. Last question here. This is a good one, a good hypothetical, fun way to end this show, in my opinion. Maddie Slice asks, Buyer Sonnone, sponsored by one more time.
Turner Group.
Woohoo! 2023 FSU would beat 2022 FSU by at least 2 touchdowns. So before you answer, think about it, Chris. FSU 2022 did not lose a game by more than 10 points, right? Was the Clemson game even that got within a score? Was it Wake Forest that was about 10 points? Either way, everything was within a score, I think. So FSU, when it lost, did not get blown out.
I'd Sonnone it for the exact reason you're speaking of. I think last year's team was good at kind of understanding game control and keeping themselves in a position to be competitive, if not win, pretty consistently. But this year's team is capable of being really, really stinking good, especially offensively. And I do think they're better defensively than they were last year, too.
Let's think about it in this vantage point real quick before you give your final answer, Chris. Would 2023 FSU, as we see it right now in camp here, be the best team that FSU faced in 2022? So better than Clemson, better than LSU, better than a healthy-ish Oklahoma. Play against NC State, I guess.
Better than LSU when they played LSU, yes. Better than LSU at the end of the year. I don't know. LSU is a team that improved as that year went on.
LSU didn't necessarily play. I mean, they got better as the year went on. They kind of ended. They ended with a shitty game against A&M. They beat the crap out of a bad Purdue team I
thought they were a team that kind of understood who they were better as the year went on, and they were figuring some things out when they played FSU.
For year one coach, but would they beat Clemson? Like, would this year's team beat last year's Clemson? I think so, right? So,
but 2 touchdowns is a lot of points.
Yeah, I think 10 points is what I would set the spread at. Which, if you're 10 points better per game, that's going to be 1 or 2 more wins. So, it's a good team. We feel good, Chris. We feel good?
Feel great.
Feel great. All right. So for Chris Nee, I'm Brendan Sonnone. Thank you to our sponsors, Chattanooga Whiskey and the Turner Group. This has been On the Bench. Thanks everyone for listening, for watching, for supporting, for playing. Buyer Sonnone, please 5-star reviews on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, thumbs up, like on the YouTube channel, all that good stuff. Thank you for checking out Noles 24/7 and for listening. We'll talk to you guys later in the week. Bye.